Rain came down so hard that night it felt like the sky itself was breaking apart. The valley blurred into gray sheets of water. Mud swallowed the road. Wind cut across the open land like a blade. Most men would have hurried home and shut their doors tight against a storm like that. Silas did not hurry. He rode steady, shoulders bent against the rain, hat pulled low over his eyes. He was a man who had learned to move slow through life. Fast decisions had cost him too much already. His world was simple: a small cabin 1 mile outside Willow Creek, a barn with more empty stalls than horses, a stove that burned low most nights because there was no one to cook for but himself. He had built his life that way, quiet, contained. Then he saw her. At first, she was only a shape on the roadside, something small and unmoving in the rain, and he almost rode past, almost told himself it was nothing, a broken fence post, a bundle of brush. But the shape moved. Silas pulled the reins and squinted through the storm. A young woman stood in the mud, her dress soaked and clinging to her thin frame. The hem was torn. Her shoes were split open at the soles. Bare skin showed where leather should have been. Both hands gripped a small leather valise like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her lips were cracked white. Her face held no tears, even though rain streamed down it like she had been crying for days. Silas rode closer. "Where are you headed?" he asked. She looked at him like she had forgotten how to answer simple questions. "I don't know anymore." 5 miles behind him sat the town of Willow Creek. 1 mile ahead waited his empty cabin. He should have left her. That would have been easier, cleaner. Instead, he held out his hand. The cabin smelled like smoke and dust when they stepped inside. Silas had not expected company in years. Dishes crusted with old beans filled the wash basin. Shirts hung over chairbacks. The air felt heavy with neglect. He fed kindling into the stove until flames caught and crackled. Behind him, she stood dripping on the floor, arms wrapped tight around herself. He handed her a wool blanket without meeting her eyes. "Get warm." She took it. Her fingers brushed his. They were cold as creek stones. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded hollow. "Ohio," she said. "My folks died when I was 17. Scarlet fever, both in the same week." Silas said nothing. He was good at silence. "I saw an advertisement. Montana rancher seeking wife. Hard-working and sincere." Her eyes stayed fixed on the fire. "We wrote letters for 3 months. He said he'd meet me at Willow Creek Depot. Said he'd wear a blue kerchief." Her grip tightened on the tin cup of coffee he had given her. "He wasn't there." She waited 2 days at the depot, slept on a bench. Then she started walking. 40 miles, 3 days, asking strangers for water. Her name was Faith, and the man who promised her a ranch and a life had a wife already. 2 children, a house with a white fence. Silas knew him well. James Hollister owned the general store. Faith did not scream when she learned the truth. She did not cry. She fed the letters into the fire one by one and watched them burn. "You can stay," Silas said. She did not answer, but she did not leave. The next morning, Silas woke to the smell of cornbread. He stepped into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. The table gleamed. The dishes were clean. Faith stood at the stove in an old apron, her hair pinned tight. "I don't take charity," she said without turning around. "I work for my keep." Days turned into something softer. She mended his torn shirts, scrubbed the windows, planted marigolds by the porch steps. Slowly, the cabin stopped feeling empty. Then the town began to whisper. A bank robbery shook Willow Creek. $3,000 gone. No one hurt. But fear traveled faster than truth. Old Jenkins claimed he saw a brown-haired woman near town the night before it happened. Faith had brown hair. Sheriff Harlan rode out to the cabin, asked questions, took notes, watched her too closely. "Don't leave the county," he warned. That night, Silas found Faith packing her valise. "I have to go," she said. "They'll say you helped me. I won't ruin your life." Silas stood in the doorway and did not move. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I'll make coffee." At 3 in the morning, under the weak glow of a lamp, Faith finally broke. Not because they accused her. Not because the church had gone silent when she walked in. She cried because someone believed her. Silas stood at the kitchen window that night and watched her shoulders shake on the porch. He had lived alone for years, trusted no one. But something inside him shifted. This was not over. The town had already made up its mind. And in Willow Creek, once a story took root, it did not die easy. Some storms came with thunder. Others came with whispers. And the worst of them were just beginning. 7 days after the sheriff's warning, the valley felt too quiet. Faith moved through the cabin like someone walking on thin ice. She cooked. She cleaned. She watered the marigolds that had just begun to push green through the soil. But the light that once lived in her eyes had dimmed. She did not hum anymore. She did not ask to go into town. She kept her world small, contained between the porch rail and the barn fence. Silas noticed everything. He noticed how she flinched at the sound of distant hooves, how her hands stilled whenever the wind carried voices from the road, how she kept the valise closer to her bed again, as if she might have to leave at any moment. The town had gone silent, but silence in a place like Willow Creek was never peace. It was waiting. On Sunday, Faith stood by the window in her dark blue dress. "I want to go to church," she said. Silas felt the weight of that request. The last time they had walked through those doors, the singing had stopped. 40 pairs of eyes had watched them sit in the back pew like strangers at a funeral. "Reckon that's your call," he said. They rode into town side by side. The buckboard wheels rolled over dust and stone. Neither of them spoke. When they stepped into the churchyard, conversation slowed. Heads turned. Mothers pulled children closer. Men narrowed their eyes. Inside, the silence came again. Not as sharp as before, but still there. Still heavy. Faith walked down the aisle with her chin lifted. Silas followed one step behind. No one greeted them. No one offered a hand. They were stones in a stream. The congregation flowed around them and never touched. After the service, Martha Perkins turned her back on Faith at the church door. The message was clear. "You are not one of us." They rode home in silence. 3 days later, Wilbur the mail carrier stopped at the cabin. Silas stepped out to meet him. "They caught the robbers down in Ridgewater," Wilbur said. 4 of them. Tried to rob another store. Sheriff wired the news. Silas felt his chest tighten. They confessed to Willow Creek. All of it. No woman with them. Not one. The words hung in the air like the first drop of rain after a long drought. Sheriff Harlan rode out that afternoon. He removed his hat before speaking. "Miss Faith," he said, "we was wrong." He did not look comfortable saying it. The men confessed. Jenkins saw someone else. Blonde woman passing through. Nothing to do with you. Faith stood on the porch, and hands folded in front of her apron. She did not smile. She did not cry. "Thank you for telling me," she said. That was all. When the sheriff rode away, Silas reached for her elbow without thinking. She did not pull away. The visitors started coming 3 days later. Martha arrived first, carrying a pie in a covered tin. Her face was red. Her voice stumbled over half-formed apologies. "I brought apple," she said. Faith accepted the pie. "Thank you, Martha." Nothing more. The preacher came next, inviting them back to church. Speaking of forgiveness, of stumbling and rising again. Faith listened, watered her flowers, said she would think about it. Jenkins did not come in person. He sent a letter instead. The handwriting shook across the page like a man unsure of his own words. "I seen wrong," it read. "I am sorry for the trouble." Faith folded the letter slowly. Silas watched her face, waiting for anger, for tears, for something. Instead, she placed it inside her chest and closed the lid. "I am not ready to forgive him," she said, "but I am not ready to burn it either." That night, she hummed again while stirring beans at the stove. It was soft at first, barely there, but Silas heard it. He sat at the kitchen table and let the sound settle into him. He had not realized how much he missed that simple music. The town had apologized. The sheriff had admitted his mistake. The whispers had faded. But something had changed. Faith no longer looked toward the road the way she once had. She no longer spoke of Ohio, no longer mentioned James Hollister. Instead, as she spoke of soil and light and how to keep morning glories climbing straight. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the ridge, Faith sat beside Silas on the porch bench. "If he had come," she said quietly, "I would be living in a house with a white fence and a man who lied to me before I ever met him." Silas looked out at the valley. "Reckon so." She turned toward him, her eyes steady. "I think I got the better end of the bargain." Silas did not know what to say to that. He had lived behind walls for so long that hope felt like a thing meant for other men. But when she leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, he did not move away. The valley stretched wide and open before them. The marigolds glowed in the fading light. The cabin behind them held warmth and lamplight. Faith had arrived in the rain with nothing but a valise and broken promises. Now she had planted flowers in stubborn soil and carved space for herself inside his silent world. But peace, Silas knew, never lasted long without being tested. And somewhere beyond the ridge, beyond the fields of sage and dust, the world still watched. 3 months passed, and the cabin no longer looked like a place a lonely man hid from the world. Morning glories climbed the porch posts in purple spirals. Marigolds burned gold along the steps. Fresh curtains hung in the windows, sewn by Faith's steady hands. The floors shined. The old rocking chair no longer creaked. Silas sometimes stood in the yard and studied his own home like it belonged to someone else. He had not meant for this to happen. He had only meant to stop in the rain. Faith moved through the kitchen that evening with her sleeves rolled to her elbows. The smell of cornbread drifted through the open screen door. She had let her hair down, and it fell past her shoulders in soft waves that caught the last light of sunset. Silas watched from the porch bench. She stepped outside and sat beside him. "I have been thinking," she said. Silas waited. "About James Hollister." The name no longer cut the way it once had. It sounded smaller now, like something far away. "I used to wonder why he did it," she continued. "Why he wrote those letters. Why he promised things he never meant to give." The valley lay stretched before them, tall grass bending in the evening wind. "Do you still wonder?" Silas asked. Faith shook her head. "No. If he had come that day, I would be living in town. Or in a house with a white fence, married to a man who lied before I even saw his face." She turned toward him, her eyes calm. "I would not be here." Silas felt something tighten in his chest. Faith smiled, just a little. I think I ended up where I was meant to. Later that night, she carried her valise to the kitchen table. The same leather case she had clutched on the roadside in the storm. The same one that had held her last pieces of Ohio. Silas leaned in the doorway and watched. She unlatched it slowly. Inside were the letters she had kept. The ones she had not burned that first night. Proof that she had not imagined her old life. She lifted them out. The stove glowed orange. Crickets sang outside. The cabin felt warm and close around them. Without speaking, Faith walked to the stove and opened the iron door. One by one, she fed the letters into the fire. Paper curled. Ink blackened. Promises turned to ash. She did not look away. When the last scrap had burned, she closed the stove and returned to the table. From her apron pocket, she pulled 3 things. The handkerchief Silas had given her that first night, thin now from washing. A dried marigold pressed flat between 2 pages of paper, and a small folded scrap with one word written in her careful hand. Home. She placed them inside the valise. Silas cleared his throat. "What are you doing?" Faith closed the lid gently and looked up at him. "Starting over." The next Sunday, she did not ask to go to church. Instead, she walked with Silas to the far fence line where the valley dipped low and wild grass swayed in waves. They stood side by side. "You never asked me something," Faith said. What's that?" "Why did you stop that night in the rain?" Silas stared at the horizon for a long time. He had asked himself that same question. "Don't know," he said finally. "Just did." Faith nodded slowly. "My mother used to say the Lord sends people exactly when they're needed. Not a moment sooner. Not a moment later." She leaned lightly against his shoulder. I think she might have been right. Silas did not answer. He was not a man of speeches, not a man who knew how to dress feelings in fine words. Instead, he let his hand move across the space between them until his fingers found hers. She did not pull away. They stood like that while the wind moved through the valley. 2 people who had been left behind by the world. 2 people who had been judged too quickly and forgiven too late. And the cabin behind them held lamplight and warmth. The porch steps held flowers planted by stubborn hands. The air smelled of earth and distant rain. Faith had arrived with nothing but broken promises and faith itself. Silas had lived years with walls built high around his heart. Somewhere between cornbread and mended shirts, between whispered accusations and quiet belief, those walls had begun to crack. That night, as stars spread across the sky, Faith rested her head against his shoulder. The world beyond the ridge still carried storms. People still whispered. Seasons would change. Winter would come again. But this time, Silas would not face it alone. He squeezed her hand gently. The road that once brought her sorrow now led to something steady, something earned. Not grand, not loud, just 2 steady breaths in the dark. And for the first time in a long while, the silence between them did not feel empty. It felt like home.